What's up, guys? Today we are going to be working on the 05 again, and we are going to be retrofitting the rear brakes to the brakes from the 97 through 03 body style. So you may be asking yourself, why would I want to retrofit the brakes to the older style brakes? If this is newer, isn't it better? Why wouldn't I just want to keep it that way? And there's a couple reasons why you might want to do that. First of all, the older body style rear brakes use a rear disc brake for the brake pedal, and then they have a drum brake inside the rotor that is your parking brake. Now, though the drum brake is not the most effective parking brake in the world, when adjusted correctly, they do work just fine, and it separates those two out. Makes changing brake pads easier, and it makes the parking brake virtually never wear out. Now, on the newer one, the parking brake is actually built into the rear brake caliper. That has a couple disadvantages. It makes the calipers more expensive. It makes you have to have one extra tool to do the rear brake pads. It also means that the pads that the parking brake use are the same one the regular brakes use, which means they're getting worn all the time. But the biggest change up, the biggest reason you may want to do this parking brake conversion is because to run the larger GXP rear brakes, you have to run this parking brake because the GXPs do not have integrated parking brakes into their calipers. Now, in my particular case, I had a bunch of 99 rear brakes laying around from where I did the GXP brakes on the 99, and this car's brakes went very badly. Had both parking brake cables fail, one of the calipers seized, and then it also ate a set of pads and a rotor. So since I had all that stuff laying around, I went to the junkyard, grabbed a few extra parts, put it all in there, saves me a lot of money. Now if I want to upgrade to GXPs later, it's a really quick bolt-on modification. But along the way I did run into some hiccups and some problems, so I'm going to take you through the first part of it now, and then we're going to go around and I'll show you all the things that I changed. Okay, so first of all, yes, it was very cold outside while I was doing this, but the first thing that you have to do when doing this conversion is pretty straightforward. You just have to remove the factory brakes. The way I'm doing it is I'm just going to remove the two caliper bridge to knuckle bolts and pull the entire caliper off with the pads in it and the caliper bridge still attached, just like this. Then you just slip the rotor right off and you're down to the wheel bearing. Now you're going to be reusing your stock wheel bearings, so make sure that you don't damage them in removing them, but all you have to do is just like in my other video, you're just going to remove 4 10mm headed bolts that go through the bearing into the knuckle, and you do that through the largest hole in the middle of the hub. Once those are out, the bearing will probably be stuck in the knuckle. That's pretty common. You can do this a number of ways. You can whack it with a hammer a few times and see if it comes off. My favorite or most effective way is to take a chisel and a small hammer and just drive between the two, between the knuckle and the hub, and you can just remove it with the backing plate and everything all together, because you will not be reusing this backing plate. Just make sure that if it falls off like this did, that it doesn't damage the wheel speed sensor connector on the back. So now you're just going to throw away your backing plate and you're going to throw away your everything but the hub. Now you're going to need the hubs, or the backing plates, I'm sorry, off of the car that you're converting to, and the first thing you're going to have to do is disassemble this parking brake mechanism, because you have to do that to be able to get the hubs in. Like I said, you're going to be reusing your rear wheel bearings, but they will have to be put into these backing plates, and the ones with the parking brake are just a slight bit more difficult. So you remove the 2 Torx bits on the back, and this little bracket will come loose. When that comes off, it will also release the wheel cylinder side, which is on the other side, and that actually sits on top of the wheel bearing. So it has to be removed to be able to get the wheel bearing into the backing plate where it belongs before you put it back on the car. So just like this, that comes off, then you can see this is loose. Make sure that this little arm doesn't fall out, or if it does, make sure no other pieces fall out. There's a tiny rod in there that's really easy to have fall out and disappear. Now you're going to take your wheel bearing, make sure it's clocked the right way, and you'll need to put the parking brake shoe around it while it's out. It's just way easier to do that way. Then sort of halfway sit it in here. Then you're going to take this wheel cylinder piece, sit it over top of it, and put the little lever through the backing plate. That will actually sit on top of, and two of the wheel bearing bolts will go through that to hold everything to the car. But you're going to go ahead, turn it around, line up all the holes as best you can so that everything fits correctly. Just like this. Then another little trick, if you're having trouble lining these up, which I'm not really right here, but another trick you can do is take a couple bolts and stick them through the holes that in the bearing that line up with this wheel cylinder, which will kind of help the two of them stay lined up correctly. I recommend doing that before you tighten down these Torx bolts, since once they're tightened down, the wheel cylinder portion will not be able to move anymore. So here I've got them started. Just going to use the bracket to line that up. This is the little wrench I'm using for the torque bits. And I'm just going to snug them at first to keep everything together, but still allow it to move. Then we just take a couple of those bolts, stick them through these holes to keep that nice and straight. And as long as that fits well and everything looks good there, I'm going to go ahead and cinch these two Torx bolts down to hold this bracket and the wheel cylinder still. This will also hold the wheel bearing in the backing plate. It cannot come out of the backing plate with this tightened down, which will make putting it together and putting it on the car a lot easier. Next, flip it over. Make sure none of your parts fell out of your wheel cylinder. As you'll notice here, one side did, which is pretty common. So make sure all your parts are still there. Make sure that little rod in there is still there. And then you're just going to put it back together. Clean off the end of that, and then make sure that this lever lines up correctly. There's a cup in the end of the lever that actually that rod goes into. When those are lined up correctly, that rod will actually hold the lever into the wheel cylinder assembly. Then just push those together because you're going to need them tight to be able to put the shoes in place. Then what I usually do here is go ahead and take this spring, the return spring, and attach it to hold the lever in the release position. Then you're just going to need to line up the two little cups on the end here to where they face up and down. That way your shoe will slide on. Then just sort of start one side and push over to the other side, and you should be able to get the shoes started sliding onto the wheel cylinder. Then just make sure they line up with the little clip at the top that holds the top of the shoe down, and then push it down. Once that's all together, you're basically done. This is all ready to go on the car. Putting it back on the car is super easy since it's all sort of an assembly, but there is one thing you need to know. You're going to need these short bolts, which are from your factory bearing, and you're going to need two of these longer bolts, which are from the donor car that you got the other assembly off of, because you need the longer ones for going through that wheel cylinder assembly on the bottom. If you try to run the longer ones in the top though, they will not tighten down all the way. So you need to run the short ones on the top and the long ones on the bottom. Once you get it seated in there, just get a couple bolts started. You can snug them up with your impact wrench or whatever you want to do there, but remember that you are going to need to do a final torque with a torque wrench. And I switched to a 3/8 socket because it just fit through here better and lined up better than the 1/2-inch one that I'd had taking them off. Then you're going to torque all of these to a final torque of 60 foot-pounds. And I like to go in sort of an X pattern just to make sure that you don't cock it one direction or the other and get the bearing crooked or get it stuck, not, you know, sliding in like it's supposed to. Then the rotor that goes with the new brake setup should slide right on. Just make sure the shoes are centered correctly. If it doesn't want to slide on, that's usually what it is, or it could be that it's adjusted out too far, but you can check that on the little wheel cylinder. Once that's on there and there's no drag, you're ready to put the caliper on. I'm actually taking the caliper, pads, and brackets as an assembly from the 99 and just sticking them right on here. And then you can use the caliper bracket bolts from the 99, or you can use caliper bracket bolts from the 05, which is what I'm using. They are the same thread, so they bolt up with no problem. Then the only thing left, once you get all of this done, will just be to connect the new hoses and the new parking brake cables, and everything should work after that. These caliper bracket bolts are very hard to get a torque wrench to sometimes, so a lot of times I just cinch them down good. You do want to try to make sure that you torque them pretty evenly to the same if you can, but it will be space dependent. So here we have the finished product. Everything is attached. Everything is functional. The parking brake works. The foot brake works. I've bled it. Everything's good. No leaks. Now, a couple snags that I did run into that I'm going to show you here. One thing to keep in mind is that in 04 and 05, the Impala still came with these brakes and did not get the same change that the Grand Prix did to the integrated caliper setup. Now, that being said, I used a lot of 97, 99, etc. parts on this, and I found a few problems. First of all, the parking brake cables changed, and where the 97 through 03 parking brake cables will fit, the Impala calipers, the Impala parking brake cables will fit this body style better. Also, these rubber hoses, the 97 through 03 version fits in here just fine, but where it meets this metal brake line back here, they changed the style of flare. It still threads up fine, but the car is single flare, the hose is double flare. To avoid running into that problem, I would suggest ordering brake hoses either for an Impala or for a GXP, because those should also work. Now, as far as the backing plate and the parking brake assemblies, those will work off of basically any older Grand Prix or newer Impala or a GXP, but you're probably not going to find a GXP in the parts yard. So you're fine there. Calipers, brackets, doesn't really matter. As long as you have a matching set, you're fine there. And the rotors are the same for all of them, so those will work. So all of that was easy. I will show you one other thing on the bottom that I had a problem with. Okay, the only other problem I really had was down here at this parking brake cable where these two go together. Right here, this nut was stuck and I was not able to get it off. So what I had to do to be able to use it was I had to break the band clamp that was right here, pry that apart so I could get this nut out, take it all to the bench off the car and free it up, get this nut off, because I had to go get a new parking brake cable and I needed it to be able to be threaded on there. So if you need to do that, it's not that big a deal. Just put some kind of a clamp back. I just used a hose clamp like this to hold this together. Otherwise it will spread when you pull the parking brake and it will pop out, which you do not want. The other thing is about the parking brake cables. As I said, your best bet is to go with the Impala parking brake cables. They made up to everything perfectly and mate to the car perfectly. So I would suggest doing that as far as that goes, but otherwise everything else pretty much fit perfectly. And that's it. Now, if you think in addition to saving money that I did this to do a GXP rear brake upgrade later, you're probably right. But hopefully this video was helpful for you. If it was, drop it a like. Drop me a comment if you have any other questions or just want to let me know how I did. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and peace.